Hello, Tom. It's nice to be interviewing you again. Today, we'd like to talk about how we might be able to help those people who find it difficult to read your books, watch the videos. They have a difficult time getting their head around the virtual reality concept. Do you have some ideas for them?
Well, yes, I do hear often enough from two groups in particular that have a hard time. They have a hard time wrapping their head around the concepts, and they have a hard time just with the language, say, in the book, and with the length of the videos. All of these things are kind of obstacles to overcome for all of us, for everybody, but they're particularly hard for some people. Now, when I wrote these books, I had a couple of ideas in mind of what I wanted to accomplish besides just get the content out, how I wanted to write it. And one of those was that I wanted to make an on-ramp for the people who are left brain, who are logical, who demand logical process, because those tend to be the movers and shakers and lawmakers, in our society. So they're important people that if I'm going to be able to make a dent or a change in the nature of this reality and the level of consciousness quality here, then I need to be able to interact with these people. I need to be able to interact with the center, not just with the fringe. I don't want to be relegated into the margins, because then there's lots of people out there in the margins saying all kinds of wonderful things that a few people in the margins listen to and the main part of our society ignores. So I don't want to be relegated to that position. So I need to reach the people who make up this great middle area. That's where the status quo is, that's where the political correctness is. So it's an area that's a little harder to work in, but it's important. So I wrote this book to give an on-ramp or enable access to these big picture ideas to a whole lot of people who just can't get there any other way. They start with their logical process minds reading a book about spirituality, get through the first 10 pages and put it down because it just doesn't make sense. There's too many assumptions. There's no logical trace. There's no research to back it up. There's nothing that makes this credible in their minds, so they can't go there. Well, there's thousands of books for people who don't need logical process to get there. Mostly the right brain folks, but other people who've had personal experiences and so on, who are more open-minded. There's lots of books. These books are mostly poetry. They talk about metaphor and image, and they have to be interpreted to a great deal to understand what they're trying to get at. And there's lots of different interpretations, and the logical mind doesn't like that sort of thing. They don't want lots of interpretations. They want one interpretation, and that's what it's about, or it's not. So anyway, that was one of my issues that I tried to do. But another one was to reach as many people as possible. I wanted it to have the broadest reach that it could possibly have. Now, I knew there were going to be some people that I just wouldn't be able to reach. And these would fall into two groups. One group would be the very right brain people who do read poetry, who do want things to be interpreted, and who intuit whether things are right or not. They don't need logical process to tell them what is true and what isn't. They can intuit what is true and what isn't. And people who are very logic bound don't understand that and don't give them much credibility for their ability to do that. But the right brainers know that they can. They understand what makes sense. They can't explain how they understand it or why they understand it or explain it to other people very well, but they know it when they hear it or when they see it. And that's the way they are. So they skip all the logical process. I knew some of those would have a hard time reading the book because the book is a book based on logical process. So I knew that would be difficult, but I tried to give enough emotive connection to the concepts as I went through so that these people could also follow along. Now for them, what I would say is, and for actually everybody I'd say, is don't try to read the books, my Big Toe books, like you would read anybody else's book or most other books. It's not a book you can just sit and read a page and turn it and read the next page and read the next page. It's not a story, other than the first half of the first book, which is a story about how I came to, what's a nice physicist like me doing in a place like this, doing consciousness research. So that's a story. But after that, it's logical process. And it's difficult for very right-brained people to process things logically. What they should do is read it very slowly. Read a paragraph, just one paragraph, and think about that paragraph. What does this paragraph infer about me? What is there about this paragraph that I can attach my own internal knowing about? What is the significance here that affects me and affects my understanding of the world? And after you've pondered that question, go to the next paragraph. This means you maybe only read 10 pages at a sitting. That's okay. Take your time. If you go through it like that, you won't be tripping over the logical process. You'll be taking it concept by concept, idea by idea, and you will probably find that you have very little trouble at all reading it if you try to read it that way. But if you try to jam 20 or 30 pages of logical process into your head all in an hour, then it's just going to come out jumbled. It won't make sense. You won't feel like you really understood it. So the thing to do is to slow down, one paragraph at a time, and just think about it. Then go on to the next. Now, if you read a paragraph that after reading it 2 or 3 times, it still just doesn't make any sense and you're still not quite sure what it's about, skip it. Let it go. Don't feel like it's important that you find meaning everywhere. Yeah, I may be talking about the powers of 10, of the number of cycles in the big clock compared to the next clock to the next, and if powers of 10 just aren't your thing, just forget about that. Those details aren't really important. What's important is the fundamental concepts, and you will be able to get all of those if you just go slowly and think about each part of it. So don't be afraid to skip what doesn't compute for you. Skip it and go on to the next paragraph. Go very slowly. All right, now that's one group that has a problem. The other group, of course, is on the opposite end, the extreme left-brainer, the people who live out of their head exclusively, the people who only want the facts. These are people who think in a world of facts. They exist and live in a world that, only of facts. Their whole world is factual. They don't have much intuition, and if they did get something intuitive, they would dismiss it or think that it was nonsense. So these people have a hard time because all they want's the facts. Just tell me the facts and don't tell me more than once. When I hear it, I got it, and go on to the next fact. You see, they would like a book that lists facts. Here's a list of all the facts. Well, that's not very helpful to most people who are trying to get this information at the being level. You see, these folks who are extremely left-brained don't get anything really at the being level. They don't even know they have a being level. In fact, they would probably argue vehemently that they don't have a being level. They are their intellect, period. They have no other components. Okay? So they have, for the most part, suppressed most of their emotions and most of their intuition. They just want the facts. Well, the facts are not particularly meaningful here. You see, MBT is not about a bunch of facts. You could memorize every word in all 3 books and still not learn a thing from any of it. The point here is to get this information out of your intellect into your being level. So you be it, not just know it intellectually. Well, in order to do that, you have to stop and consider, how does this fact apply to me? How does this statement, how does this concept apply to me? How does it, how does it inform my own experience? You have to do that, and you have to go over it again and again from different perspectives to see that. That's how you get things from your intellect down to your being level. If it just is in your intellect and you just have a fact, that's not going to be very helpful in your ability to grow up and lower your entropy, grow up spiritually. It just won't help you much until you move those things down into your being level. Well, that being level is a feeling level. It's the emotive level. It's the aha, I understand it level at the at a lower level in the intellect. And you don't get there just by cataloging facts. You have to look at that fact from 5 different perspectives. Oh, how does this fact apply to this part of my life? And how does that fact apply to that part of my life? And what does this fact say about my future and how I need to change or how I need to grow? So you need all these perspectives, and then you integrate all those perspectives into a sense of understanding, which is now more of a sense of feeling than it is of knowing that you've got it. And that's the way it works at the being level. The being level doesn't have to ask, should I do this or should I not? It knows, because it is a way. Should I be kind? Should I help the little old lady across the street, or should I go on and be on time for my appointment? When you have the answer at the being level, you don't need to do that analysis. You just do what is right. And it could be either one. It could be help the little old lady, or it could be go on and not be late for your appointment. That appointment might be very critical to other people. So, but you don't have to figure it out. You don't figure everything else out. You generally just work out of a sincere and, what's the word I'm looking for, a holistic viewpoint. You have to be authentic, and that authentic person knows what they need to do. It's a matter of weighing. You can weigh some things, yes, and make some considerations, but it's not really an intellectual choice as it is a knowing what the right thing is to do. See, there's too many variables. If you don't help that lady, is she going to get run over by a car? Well, if then you better stop and help her, even if this other thing's pretty important. Is that appointment you have going to cause huge problems for people if you're not there on time and it doesn't work right? Well, then that too. You see, you can't answer these questions intellectually. There's too many variables you don't know. There's lots of things. If you could sit down with a spreadsheet and list all the possibilities on both sides and then try to compare them, you still wouldn't do very well, because you'd be missing a lot of the variables that you don't know. Maybe all the drivers are going to be very kind, or maybe somebody else will help that old lady if you don't. You say you don't know that. So you have to solve these problems at an intuitive level, which has information about probable future in it. See, that's part of your intuitive level, is you have this information connection to the probable future database. You have a sense of what is going to be most important. That's how you make these decisions. You take your logical part and you take your intuitive part, you work those together and very quickly come out with what's the right thing to do. You see, if you don't have that intuitive part, you have to calculate based on maybe 10% of the information, and you can't come to a logical conclusion. You just end up jumping to a conclusion because you don't have the information that you would get at the being level. All right, so the idea is that I wrote the book so that people would be able to move this information from their intellect into a being level. That's why it tends to look at the same thing from many different angles, because if you don't, you're stuck with it in your head and you never synthesize it into your being level because you haven't really grasped it at a deeper level than just the factual level, you see. So now the problem is, I've made my book to tell do the most good for the most number of people, to be an on-ramp for the people who are logically oriented. And the people who are extremely left brain just find that infuriating. They tell me, just tell me the facts. Don't tell me this other stuff, because they don't process things to a being level. They, in their own mind, don't have a being level. Of course they do, but they don't communicate with it, and they don't deal with it or work with it, and they don't really have intuition. Of course they do, but they just don't work with it. So it's kind of an unknown thing that they don't trust and don't have any credibility to them that these things even exist. So those are the two people that have a hard time. Now I explained to the ones on the right brain side, what they need to do. The ones on the left brain side need to realize that this is not just a string of facts. Facts won't help them grow up. Understanding helps them grow up, and not understanding just understanding the facts, but understanding it from an intuitive, from a feeling, from a, how does this affect me in my life? How can I carry these ideas forward into future behavior, future ways of being? Do I want to change? Do I need to change? What does this paragraph, what does this page, what are the challenges in this page to do, rather than just go through and catalog all the facts on the page? Well, that's difficult for people like that, but they need to do that. Again, the solution to that is take small bites. Take a paragraph and read it and think about it. Don't just see, well, let's see, this book is 2 inches thick, it's going to take me 5 hours to read it. And I read books quickly. Well, you can't process it at the being level quickly. That takes more time. The being level only gets information slowly after it's been integrated and broadened to a larger perspective. So both ends that have problems have a similar solution. Read slowly. Look at it from different viewpoints. See, how will this affect my life? What is this talking about? Is this something I need to do, or is this something I've already done? Or really, what is this? What's going on? What's the takeaway here? Not in facts, but in how does it affect me? See, the takeaway has to be in terms of how does this affect me and how I see the world and my worldview. Well, you have to do that, and whether you're listening to an audio, either the audio book, reading the book, or listening to a YouTube video like this one, you have to take that time to think about it and cogitate on it rather than catalog the facts in it.
Is this why you have set out various concepts in different ways? You've repeated some things just to spur that thinking in different ways.
Yes, repetition is one of the key things that moves information from the intellect to the being level. If you just hear something once, even if it's an amazing fact, it usually just stays in your head as an amazing fact, and then you go on and forget about it. It's just there. All right, you can draw it out at a cocktail party and you can make, chit-chat about it, but it doesn't really affect you. You have to have repetition. You have to see it. You have to hear it again. Think about it differently. Hear it again. And not all at once. You might wait then for a month before you hear it again, you see? And then it will slowly get down into that being level where it now is yours. You have, it becomes a part of you. And that's important, that this information doesn't just stay in your intellect. It'll make you sound sharp, perhaps, because you can discuss it, but it won't help you grow up any. Growing up requires repetition. Think about growing up as a child. You're 10 years old and you want to be 21. Well, it's a lot of repetition. You go through the same lessons over and over and over again. How to be polite, how to be courteous, how to be helpful, how to not be so self-centered. These things you repeat over and over and over again before, I get it. All I have to do is be aware of other people more and not just it's all about me, and my life will get better. You see, but that comes out of hundreds of repetitions of lessons before you get that. And that's the way it always is. People ask, how do I get it from my head down to my being level? Well, you got to work with it. You got to live it. You have to repeat it in many different ways. You have to apply it in many different, aspects, different situations. And then it begins to sink down to the being level. You become it rather than think about it. So that's important. Yes, the repetition of looking at things from different perspectives, saying them now. In my book, I have this thing that I start off with a leader. First time I mention a concept, I just mention it in passing. I don't mention it again sometimes for another chapter, or maybe even the next section. And then I'll mention it again maybe as 2 or 3 comments. And it's just to get people processing the idea. So when I get to the major discussion of that idea, they've already heard bits and pieces of it 2 or 3, 4 other times, which has started their mind thinking about it, so that by the time they get to the main discussion of it, they already have just a little background. Because if they get to the main discussion first, and that hits them cold, they'll be lucky if they get more than 2% out of that main discussion, because it hits them cold. They won't be prepared for thinking about it. They won't have the concepts in line. It'll be very inefficient way for them to learn down at the being level. So you'll notice that in all my book, in all the major concepts, they start, like look up the word entropy. And the first time I mention that, it's just in passing. I don't even define it. I just mention it. The second time, I mention that, there's maybe a sentence about it. The third time, maybe a paragraph. It's not until much later that I actually talk about it. All the big concepts in my books are done that way. They start off as a dribble and then they build. Well, if you're just a fact finder and that's all you're doing, when you hear it the third and the fourth and the fifth time, you're tearing out your hair saying, geez, okay, I got that, don't tell me anymore. These 3 books could be one small book, and it would be better for me. Well, it would be better as far as you cataloging all the facts, but it wouldn't be better as far as you growing up and making anything useful out of those facts, you see. So, again, I'm talking about people under the fat part of the curve. I'm not talking about everyone. There's all sorts of exceptional people to which normal things don't apply. So there is some exceptional people that can take it, read it cold in one day and get a lot out of it. But those are people who are prepared, who already have understandings. These are people that come already for these concepts. And then it just rolls very quickly. And they could probably get it in a book half the size and still do fine. But that's not the people under the fat part of the curve. And I mean the probability curve. So the 90%, the 95% of the population isn't going to get it quickly. It's something they have to think about. And people will say that. They'll tell me in the YouTube, well, yeah, I've heard most of these ideas 10 times already, but today I finally got it. I hear that a lot. That's because it takes repetition. So those of you who live out of your head, who really don't have a being level and really don't have any intuition, think about this from a different perspective. It's not about the facts. It's about understanding the nature of reality and how that impacts you. And that isn't something that can be done quickly and still work down into the being level, which is necessary if it's going to change you. Otherwise, all you'll do is have a head full of information and be the same person you were before. The point of these books is that you're a different person than you were when you started reading and when you finish reading, that you grow up some, or at least start on a path of growing up. That's the whole point, to get the encouragement and get the inspiration to change yourself, to grow up. So that's really, I guess, all I have to say about that. Hopefully the people on both ends will find a way. This on-ramp is not working for them, you see. the ones that need poetry and metaphor rather than facts, they're intimidated by the size of the books and the logical process, and they're not getting on the on-ramp. And the ones that are extremely intellectual, that only deal in facts, they can't get on the on-ramp either, because they just cannot tolerate the repetition and the coming at things from different angles, because they're not absorbing it, they're just cataloging it. And there's a difference between absorbing it and cataloging it.
Yes, these things that you set out in your books almost have to be like a download. There are many comments over the years of people who've said, I was ready for this information, and your way of setting it out unlocked this for me. It just sort of set things in motion, and all of a sudden, all of the things that they had been thinking about, all of the experiences that they had been thinking about just sort of exploded, and all of these things started happening. And I think in some cases, this is because they were ready for it.
Right.
And your advice to both sides of the spectrum, the logical brain and the right brain, is very good if they would really like to grasp this my big toe concept. Slowly take it in, let it download, and I think you will find that this will unlock a lot of things for you and answer a lot of questions for you. I think that's a very good advice, and that has been proven by the many comments you've had over the years.
Yeah. Well, the great masses in the middle who read the book don't have any problem. They don't notice repetition, you see? And it's not because they're just too stupid to notice repetition. It's because the repetition is useful for them. Seeing something from multiple directions helps them take it out of their intellect and digest it, helps them absorb it rather than catalog it. And they find that part useful. That's the majority of people. Yeah, for every, I get probably 100 emails that say, this is the best book I've ever read. It's the best book ever written. It's the best book I've read. And it's wonderful. Gee, I wish I'd have had this 20 years ago. That is the majority of the books. There's no complaint there about it's too hard to read, too much logical process. There's no complaints about repetition or anything. It just suits them well because they are ready to take in the information. They need the different perspectives in order to process that information and absorb it. So they like that. But then there's this 5% that are out on either end, on the extremes of right brain and the extremes of left brain, who just can't get it. They can't tolerate it. They can't get through the book. They can't really get through a video. It just is painful for them to sit and listen to it for opposite reasons, but they have the same experience. It's just too painful to do. So I'm hoping this little video we're making will give them some help, some way that they can connect and they can get on this on-ramp and they can find a bigger picture, not in their intellect. Intellectual big pictures are a dime a dozen. Go read a philosophy book. You'll get a whole bunch of intellectual big pictures that probably won't do anything to help you grow up. Well, this one will, if you get it. This will help you grow up if you're ready to absorb it and take it in. So don't give up. Pick that book back up again and approach it with a whole different attitude. Not one of I have to understand everything on every page. You don't if you're very right brain. Skip over the stuff that you just can't process. But only skip over it after you've tried reading it 2 or 3 times, just a paragraph at a time. If it still doesn't work after you've read it a few times, then go on. Do the next one. And yeah, it'll take a long time. It may take you 3 or 4 months to read the books that way. It's okay. It's okay if it takes you a year to read the books that way. You can read only, 1 paragraph each day. You'll still eventually get through them. And that's what counts, as opposed to getting frustrated, a third of the way in and putting it down. That isn't going to be helpful. So hopefully I've been helpful to both ends of this, to both extremes of the spectrum, to help them get through the issues and to get onto this on-ramp to a bigger picture understanding at the being level. not just a bigger picture understanding at the intellectual level, because that isn't really what it's about.
Well, thank you for this, Tom. And Extreme Left Brain and Extreme Right Brain, pick up those books again and give it another try. Thank you, Tom.